Good.
Okay.
All right. Well, it is 9 o'clock, everyone. So welcome to the kickoff live session for the Summer Institute, the 2021 Summer Institute, MTSS Summer Institute. This is our keynote session. We're really excited to have Dr. Shinn with us. Let me see if I can. So Dr. Shinn, I'm going to do a little introduction real quickly. Dr. Shinn obtained his PhD in the School of Psychology from the University of Minnesota in 1981 and recently retired as a professor of the School of Psychology and Special Education after 19 years at the University of Oregon and 18 years at National Louis University in Chicago. He has devoted his career to school improvement through what has become MTSS for 40 years, beginning with the initial implementation efforts in 1980 in St. Paul and Minneapolis public schools. Since those early efforts, he has contributed to school district and state department MTSS implementation efforts in 45 states, including Oklahoma. His special areas of expertise are progress monitoring and screening using curriculum-based measurements in MTSS and special education. He has edited 2 books on curriculum-based measurements and has published more than 100 journal articles and book chapters on progress monitoring, screening, and SLD identification practices, and co-edited 3 editions of Interventions for Achievement and Behavior Problems, Preventative and Remedial Approaches, published by the National Association of School Psychologists. So I am going to drop in all of his handouts into the chat for everyone, and I'm going to let him go ahead and get started. And I also want to just promote to everyone, y'all already probably heard this, but there will be other recorded sessions available at the Oklahoma Edge platform, and one of the moderators today will drop in the links to the Oklahoma Edge platform as well if you're interested in accessing some of those online sessions that we will have available. So I'm going to let Dr. Shinn get started.
Good morning, everybody. Let me see if I can do a screen share here. And I'll discover more than meetings. Let me, guys, okay. Play. Okay. I hope this goes well for everybody. It's Tuesday, I guess. The summer is starting to blend together for me. I did just sort of recently retire, in part because I've been doing this a really long time. And trying to balance everything is always a challenge for me. I'm tasked with the topic of building MTSS on a solid foundation. And this is really going to be about Tier 1 and the challenges that we all face in trying to impact a system that's not targeting kids that need intensive intervention. This is the things that we do for all kids with the idea of preventing problems, and really a phrase that I would really like us to use much more consistently, which is promoting positive development, growth and development. That's what Tier 1 is about, growth and development for all kids, okay, as a component of MTSS. Okay, so you have this description. Okay, and it says that Tier 2 and Tier 3 are not the solution to large-scale problems. I have spent a good 6 months about 10 years ago working with Chicago public schools. I've been doing that since probably about 1980, and the challenges of large numbers of kids and families at risk can be very overwhelming. I was on the Mayor of Chicago's Literacy Task Force with the idea of promoting activities in CPS that would reduce the need for kids for special ed. Tier 1, it's based on a couple things, and we'll spend some time on them, which is what can we do about promoting a positive and nurturing, a key word I would like us to also use more often, school climate, okay? And it's also about giving kids the opportunity to break the cycle of institutional poverty and expand for typically developing kids their opportunities to navigate complex text by becoming much more proficient in reading, as my primary example today. I'm not going to be talking about math. The same sort of principles apply, okay? And certainly content area instruction is going to be part of what I do, because once kids get into grades 5, grade 6, and above, most of their instruction is not about reading, it's about particular content. And that's tier 1 as well. So, I don't need to go through my professional stuff because Beth Ann did a nice job of that. It's actually a little embarrassing. I'd like to think that I'm kind of a normal person, okay, just trying to do their best work. I have a disclosure statement, because if I talk about some of these products that are seen in tier 1, I want you to know that right now, nobody pays me to say stuff, okay, other than Oklahoma as part of OTSS, okay, and so I hope I can do this from an objective perspective. I do get a stipend still for being a member of the National Advisory Board for the Consortium on Reaching Excellence, and I'll put a little plug in them because they do the best training in terms of their online reading academy and on-site coaching to improve the quality of tier 1 and other tiered services. Okay, so I want to start here, and I struggle when I talk about tier 1, is I think that you will see, because it makes me really, really, really uncomfortable to talk about some of these issues, because I don't want to lose you as an audience, okay? Here's, I have to start and be honest here, okay? I'm not in the business of educator bashing, because I'm an educator. As you'll see, my wife is an educator, and we do the best we can with what we have. And so, yes, our country has clearly a problem with underperforming students, and that's all kids. Even our best readers aren't that great, okay, with respect to reading proficiency. And we have large numbers of kids who just can't navigate text. That's scary to me. But this problem is not unique, okay? Many, if not most, schools have sizable proportions of kids who are not proficient, okay? So when we look at this, most of us are underperforming with respect to giving those schools that are necessary for school and subsequently life success. I want to share just something that was a major article in the last 6 months about outcomes in terms of life income for persons with different degrees. Here's what I want to be clear about. All of these outcomes are not due to teacher effort. We're all working hard at this, but I had to, when I was in graduate school decades ago, I had to have special permission to take a course on reading, okay? And for many of us, most of our education about the science of reading is insufficient or inaccurate. It's not our fault. We're doing the best that we can. So please bear with me, okay? I will likely say some things that are not just my opinion. They come from reading science that may make individuals uncomfortable, okay? But please bear with me. Hang in there with me. I'm on your side, okay? So I'm not talking about you as individuals, and I'm certainly not talking about the variables, some of which you can't control. Okay, we do the best with what we're given. We do the best with what we're expected about. But if we're going to be promoting positive development and preventing problems, we're going to have to do some things differently than what we have been doing. Okay, I really struggle with this. I'm better than you or any, believe me, I have the lowest self-concept of anybody you know. Okay, and here's the challenge in front of us. This is the statistic that I would like us to take a look at, and it's the differences in earning power, okay, growth of earnings over time as a function of the degree, okay? So if you have a graduate degree, okay, over decades, your growth of your earnings has been pretty darn good, okay? If you're a guy, okay, this is differentiated by gender. But take a look, you know, and it's also the same for women, okay? Women who have a graduate degree, earning power has grown pretty dramatically, okay? Take a look at a high school dropout if you're a guy, okay? Your earning power, okay, has gone down. Even high school graduates, their earning power has gone down. Even college, their earning power, some college, their earning power has gone down. Now, if you're a woman and drop out, guess what? Your earning power has actually grown, okay? It's better, but still, okay? And what are the things that influence, okay, attainment of these different levels of education? Kids drop out when they're not successful. Kids drop out when they're not connected, okay? Being connected to school, feeling a part of it is part of tier one. Being successful in school is in very large part based on your ability to read and navigate complex text, okay? So these are the areas in tier one that I really want to focus on today, okay? Now, let's see if I can get this to work. Here's NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is going to be fourth grade. And if I get this to work, you'll be able to see trends over time in terms of proficiency. Now, when we look at, you know, NAEP scores for white kids, you know, not a lot of growth, okay? And really what we would like is, since the bar is actually fairly low for proficiency, we'd really like to be above that NAEP advanced. Now, let's see if I can get this to work. Whoop, I did get it to work, but I got to leave it alone. You'll see this. Here's white. Here's Black. Here's Hispanic. Here's Pacific Island. Here's Asian. Here's Native Hawaiian. And here's Native American, okay? And what we see, I look at these data, and we have too many typical kids who are not proficient, and no change in the gaps of subgroups, okay, relative to white kids. And we can do better than this. It's clearly established. We can do better than this. And why do we get these improvements, since we know now in 2021 more about school climate and more about reading success than ever before? Why? Okay. And it starts with this. Right now, 61% of teachers use leveled text, okay, as their instructional resources. These are the tools we've been given, okay? And only 23% in the early grades use decodable text. This is what science says about kids learn to read, and teachers are not given the tools that they need. And I'm not sure why. Oh man, I've lost something. I'll come back to it. There's a slide missing. The most popular programs, one of which is LLI. Again, this is from Ed Week, okay, titled by the most popular reading programs aren't backed by reading science. Even LLI's own research showed that kids only made growth in grades K1 and 2 on their own assessment, which is not an external validator of reading. And when you look at a measure like Dibbles, kindergartners and first graders did a little better than the control group, but the second graders saw no difference. Yet it's a very, very, very popular program. So we end up with, okay, and these are some resources you can see. This is Louisa Mtss's perspective, and I've worked with Louisa on a number of things, including a class action suit, okay, that we have been given. When I say we, I'm going to say including me, an education that promotes half-baked theories, fads, opinions, and unsupported practices that jeopardize student learning. Things like the three queuing or the queuing system is not only not valid in terms of an effective strategy, it actually inoculates kids from strategies that are more effective. So here's the bottom line. When you see something that doesn't align with reading science, we have to say something. And this morning, I will be saying some things, okay? Because as long as we tolerate the misinformation that we've been given, that reading is a natural process like speech, not true. That it's either phonics or comprehension, not true. That's false equivalency. It's both. But the lack of phonics instruction tied to our oral language is crippling our students. Our inability to teach spelling, which is the way we link our oral language to print, okay, is causing children to pay the price. So we've got to do better. We have to say something. And I'm not trying to, again, teacher bash, because these are variables often beyond our control. But if we're going to impact tier 1 with respect to school climate and reading, they go hand in glove. Kids will be successful in school and feel better about their education if they're successful in reading, and vice versa. So let's briefly, look, the most popular, this is in Ed Week, okay? The top 5 reading materials, none of these things are aligned with reading science. And I'm sure that many of us as teachers in Oklahoma have been given these tools and their corresponding philosophies to help kids get off to a healthy start in reading. And it's not going to be possible for way too many kids. We'll talk more about that. And in this article, they consistently look at the data, report the data on why queuing strategies should not be used as the mechanism for addressing unknown words. Again, it's not a benign strategy that's ineffective. It, in many cases, makes kids worse. So here's my perspective. I used to describe myself as young and idealistic and naive, okay? Well, guess what? After 40 some years at this stuff, I'm certainly not young, but I have to remain idealistic and naive, that we can reduce the gap between how we practice in terms of tier 1 and tier 2, or tier 1 in terms of school climate and getting kids off to a healthy start in reading. I'm an old curmudgeon, but I remain idealistic and naive. And I have some reasons for that. One is my wife is a school administrator, 21 years as a school principal, where she has been asked to come in and turn around schools, and she's done that really well. She's now the director of school improvement. She has to also remain optimistic in a tough job. I have to remain optimistic because I have a son who's 21, who's in college, and he's struggling navigating complex text. Okay, he's a pretty good reader, but he was not supported in middle school and high school with the kind of instructional practices to help him navigate complex text. Dominic, 21, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which has certainly not helped his education. He has an older brother, Peter, and he's a real survivor, and I won't go into that, but My Father's Day present was a phone call from Peter saying that he too was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, 2021. And guess what? This is not my grandkid. This is Mateo, okay? And he's a good reader who does not like to read, okay? And that's going to be a problem as he approaches middle school and or more of high school curriculum. So I've got this person. Now here's the deal. There's a set of reading resources that are all available as public domain, okay? And I've given you, Beth Ann has what I call my, not spurn of the moment, it's spur of the moment list of resources that what I call suggesting a ray of hope. This is when I was on steroids in the middle of the, and I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, and I got and put together a whole bunch of things for you to access. And I want to highlight just a few of them, okay? So here we go on this roller coaster. I hope you're still with me. I hope you're feeling okay about what it is that I'm saying. And I hope that we'll have some time to talk about these things more informally. So I believe that Kristen is doing some monitoring of some of the things in the chat. Please feel free to interrupt me. I can go on and on and on and on. I'm a member of that group, and I don't want to do this as a train that goes down the track rather than just a roller coaster, but that goes too fast. Okay, here we go. So here's, if I had one thing that I could give people, it would be this book, and it's Phyllis Hunter, and it's entitled, it's like $16 on Amazon. It's a great read. It's a really easy read. I was on the National Advisory Board with Phyllis Hunter for many years. She was part of the George Bush initiative to help kids become better readers. This book is not just about students of color, although that's in the title. We lost Phyllis 2 years ago now to breast cancer, but was one of the most inspirational people in my life. It's entitled, for a good reason, it's not complicated. What I know for sure about helping students of color become successful readers. We could very easily delete from the title, helping the words of color in this book. This is the science of reading. This is Mark Seidenberg, who is now widely acknowledged as the most knowledgeable person about the science of reading. And it's a fantastic read. The middle chapters get a little complicated about brain science and what we know, because it really is designed, I swear, for neurologists. But I read it, and but the beginning chapters and certainly the last chapters are fantastic. And his website has fantastic resources. Language at the speed of sight. How we read, why so many can't, and importantly, what can be done about it. Okay, we're calling out those things that are not aligned to the science of reading. Now, here's another book, a great resource about schools and schooling, but also about our culture. This is by a community psychologist named Anthony Biglan, or Tony Biglan, okay? It's an inspiring book about how human behavior and how the science of human behavior can improve our lives and our world, and it's called The Nurture Effect. I'm going to encourage us to use a couple different words more frequently, okay, in our practice, and one of them is nurture. We want to create nurturing cultures, okay, helping kids become successful in social emotional learning, their behavior, and certainly in an important area like reading, especially beginning reading success, okay? The Nurture Effect. Read it and go to this site. Now, here's another word I'd really like us to use more frequently as part of MTSS. Isn't this weird? All of this science stuff, and we're talking about nurturing. And here's the other word I'd like us to use more often. It is about kindness. This is a book and a website by Doug Carnine. Notice Doug, 35 years as a professor of special ed at the University of Oregon, okay, contributed to 50 textbooks about the science of instruction, especially reading and math, okay? And here's Dr. Carnine writing about translating all of this stuff into kindness in a fantastic book called Love Wins. And if we're going to be creating more nurturing cultures of school, okay, kindness is a key component of it, okay? I'm most of the way through this book on a recording of it, so it's a book on tape, so it's fantastic. Now, here's what I want to communicate in the time that we have today. These are called big ideas, and I'm a big fan of what's called teaching from a big ideas perspective. Here's the things that I'm going to try to summarize here in about an hour, okay, that only took us like 40 years of work to do, okay? Finally, I think, we might be at the tipping point where we're getting things through our head, sometimes by learning really hard lessons. And here they are, okay? Number one, MTSS and OTSS success is built on a foundation of, first and foremost, we've got to be consistent in describing what it is and what it isn't, because there still remains an awful lot of practice out there that's based on something that might have been done, 30 years ago, where teachers refer a kid to a team and the team talks about them and they come up with interventions and somebody delivers them. And I'm going to argue that's reactive and not what contemporary perspective of an MTSS is. We're going to be focusing on school climate through a couple components at tier 1, okay? That it's about social emotional learning. So kids are educated about cultural norms, about how we do things, how we treat people with respect and compassion and understanding, and yes, treating people with kindness, okay? This is necessary, but not sufficient for creating nurturing climates, because we have to translate that educative process into the actions of adults, that it makes the expectations clear, teaches the expectations, and importantly, acknowledges and rewards attainment of those expectations in all environments, from environments on the bus to on the playground, in the cafeteria, in the hallway, in the classrooms, in after-school sports activities. These are all things that we do to promote nurturing climates. But it's not good enough if it's not translated into actions in the classrooms. I still see school-wide behavior support in the hallways, and I see teachers trying very hard, but using practices like red light, yellow light, green light, which are very inconsistent with positive behavior support, because they focus teacher attention on undesired behavior with the unintended consequences of not being effective, and in fact maybe increasing undesired behavior. So it can't just stop at the hallway. It's got to permeate into the schoolroom classroom, okay? Now, the second part of this part of building this foundation is a strong language arts curriculum. And notice I didn't say reading, I said language arts, because I see schools doing reading, but not spelling and not writing, okay? And if they do that, that's a mistake, because we're only focusing on part of what makes students successful readers. Even handwriting and printing has been demonstrated to lead to reading success because kids learn the difference between capitals and small letters, and that all contributes to understanding vowels. So it's very weird, but it's a strong language arts curriculum. Notice, it's aligned to the needs of students, not adults. When I hear an administrator or a teacher say, I don't like that program, my wife's response is, ain't about you. Some of the things we do are just plain hard work and not as play-oriented as many reading approaches may be, okay? Now, not in this session, but in my follow-up, we'll be talking about database decision-making. Because if we talk about MTSS, I'm not going to do it in this session, but these are the building blocks for me as part of MTSS. Now we're beyond the core now, okay? But part of the core is simple screening, okay? That is not burdensome to teachers, and triages students to appropriately intensive interventions. No failing at tier 2 if you need tier 3. It's not hoop jumping, but notice, simple and not burdensome. We're collecting way too much data. This is my area of expertise. Again, we'll talk more about it in that breakout. Tiered interventions that use powerful proven programs. And the concept, fourth concept I hope we can get into is the words reduce the gap. So I've talked about nurturing, and I've talked about kindness, and I really want to introduce, again, key vocabulary and concepts like what we do at tier 2, tier 3, and special ed is use interventions that reduce the achievement gap. Kids have to learn more in the same time. Now that, again, is not about the core, it's related to the core, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it in this session. And finally, the thing that we think about in terms of establishing a tiered system of supports is that we have progress monitoring that is scientifically sound, time and cost efficient. We monitor a few things, not everything, and it's consistent in terms of how we might do it in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and special ed. Our special ed IEPs should be based on the same data system, not a separate data system, but the same data system as we would use in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Okay, so totally irrelevant photo. This is Dominic and Matteo standing in a field of lavender in southern France. And I like the photo, so bear with me. Okay, so if we're going to have a foundation, and I hope that this is redundant from what you've been learning as part of your SPDIG grant and your efforts of your Department of Ed. I hope this is just some simple review for you. So what is it, whether you put an O in front of it and make it uniquely part of Oklahoma, or whether it's anywhere across our country. So what is MTSS? Okay, and here's what it's not. It's not just a new name for how we've been doing things for a long time. Okay, it's not a new name for RTI. It's not a new name for older style problem solving and problem solving teams. That's not what we're doing. It's not referring kids to a team where we talk about a kid to death and then tell that teacher to come back after they've tried 2 things. Because if a kid can't read, that kid is probably outside the reach of that general ed teacher in our current world. And we've got to do better than that. It is not about lots of paperwork and hoop jumping. Okay, what we want to do is we want to make this system proactively designed. So much like our medical system, if we see a problem, we've already identified a solution because that kid is not unique in what they're bringing to the table, okay? The old model was test a kid and figure out what to do. The new model is teach that kid. And if they don't respond to a really good intervention, then we may assess, okay? But only if we have to. So MTSS is not the process we go through to get a kid into special ed. Yes, some kids may participate or go through a tiered system, and we decide that they need an even more intensive program provided by special ed, but it is not primarily designed to get kids into special ed. Okay, now let's take a step back, because here's the part that really bothers me, okay? We fail to understand what the word even system means. And here's the Google definition: a set of things working together as part of a mechanism or interconnecting network. Let's take this apart, because when we look at what we do, we should see how things are connected. Let me give you a brief example. Your Tier 2 reading intervention should address the identified weaknesses of your core. But your Tier 2 shouldn't just be something picked out of the blue. It should be picked because no core reading or language arts program or math program is perfect. We need to know what the weaknesses are, because that's typically where kids fall apart. And Tier 2 should address the known weaknesses of your core. Oh, so that means we have a set of things, okay? And in my perspective, they should be carefully thought out and clearly identified, working together as part of an interconnecting network. Okay, I'm going to give you a test now. If we were in person, I'd be able to, do this together. We could do some choral responding, but we can't do that online. So here's my question. Is early childhood services part of MT systems of support? Of course, the answer is yes. We shouldn't just start in K if we've got a pre-K system. Early childhood should be part of our MTSS. Is middle school and high school part of our MT systems? I'm emphasizing the word systems of support. And of course, the answer is yes. How about this? Is social emotional learning? I get this one all the time. Where does social emotional learning fit in? It's part of our Tier 1 efforts to educate kids about what is and what is not appropriate behavior and our behavioral norms. So the answer, of course, is yes. How about this? Is behavior part of? Of course. How about this? Is math? Of course. How about this? Special ed. Is it part of? Of course. If we have a special ed system and MTSS, that seems two systems. We want to see a system designed to meet the needs of all students. Here's one of my pet peeves. I see what we do for English learners as separate from tiered services. And I'm going to argue that's not true. No, English learners are part of MTSS. And what about Title I? I still see Title I doing their own thing. Here we've got Tier 2 and we've got Title I. How come Title I is not our primary source for Tier 2 service delivery? Well, that would be part of separate systems. How do we get them to work together? So here's one of my it can be major takeaways. I want us to see what we do as part of our tiered services. And again, let's think really big. I want what we do in academic and behavior, social emotional learning, to do this: promote positive development and early intervention for all students. This is our system for all and all the things we do. It's characterized that way as part of our ESA, Elementary Secondary Education Act, in all students succeed. Where does RTI fit? RTI is a little circle, not a big circle. RTI is a very little circle. That's important because if we're still doing ability achievement discrepancy, if we still have psychometricians doing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of testing to determine kids' eligibility for special ed, we will not be able to build a system like this. We will have general ed and special ed as very separate systems. And that's not the way we need to be thinking and doing. So let's start talking about what it is that we do to promote positive development for all students. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the importance of social emotional learning. Because one of the things, let's go back, a nurturing school climate where kids can feel successful and connected. When kids are unsuccessful and disconnected, why be there? They will drop out. So we've got sort of this two-pronged goal. How do we make kids feel successful? And how do we help them feel connected? Okay? And it starts with things like social emotional learning. But social emotional learning social emotional learning alone is not enough, because it tells us what we do, but it may not motivate us to do it. There's a difference between knowing and doing. And the doing part is where all that learning shows up. And that means we must have some system of positive behavior supports. And there's a couple ways we can do that. We can talk about PBIS, or we can talk about some things that are like PBIS, but done a little bit differently. I'll show some examples a little bit later. They're all working from the same database, by the way, and they're not antagonistic. But it's about promoting positive behavior supports. I'm using a broader term than and I don't want to say just PBIS. But it's all environments, gang. That's transmitted in the classroom. I remember I was doing an audit of a school, school district, and we went school to school. And almost always I saw clearly articulated behavior support expectations in pretty much every environment. But when I walked into the classroom, I saw a set of typically classroom rules that all started with no or don't. That's inconsistent, of course, with any type of school-wide behavior support. What happened in the classroom tended to be more punitive and ineffective. What happened outside the classroom tended to be more positive and preventive. It has to be in the classroom too. So when we think about positive school climates, what are we talking about? Okay. Now, guess what? This is not my area of expertise. Okay. I know about things like CASEL, and I'm familiar with some of the work of Roger Weissman and folks like that. But if you want the best areas of expertise in terms of, go to Dr. Clay Cook. Now, I don't have time to show you Clay's video, but I'm going to tell you, if you want someone who connects with teachers, who understands the research and is translating the research, go there. Okay, I think he's just amazing in terms of the science of his work and how he's translating it into things that we can all do and understand. This is a variation of a TED talk that he did, the first one, and the second one is his website. Okay, and maybe if we've got time, we can come back to it a little bit. But this is what I would be doing in terms of starting with connecting our social emotional learning with our school-wide behavior support to create a nurturing environment. Now, if you're unfamiliar with CASEL, okay, which helps you select a validated, okay, because there's a lot of stuff out there that people are selling, a validated social emotional learning curriculum. Notice down at the bottom of this slide, their 2021 edition helps you select a high quality social emotional learning program. Check it out. See what you're doing now is aligned with or a part of what they would review favorably, okay? Because again, I see a lot of people trying hard, but not using the best tools to be able to accomplish the job, okay? So when I start thinking about school-wide behavior support in nurturing environments, guess what? I can go into a school and look for the signs, and they are actually signs, okay? And so when I walk into any building, whether it's my wife's buildings, whether it's an audit I'm doing on behalf of a school board, or in some circumstances, a state required, because of a takeover issue, regardless of what my role is, I am starting with the perspective of, I'm looking for the signs of nurturing culture and school-wide behavior support. This is an example, and yes, they are actual signs. Yes, I'm looking for the 3 Bs or the 5 Rs or the whatever you might call your little slogans or takeaways, but I'm also looking for clearly articulated expectations as a function of environment. And this is one from Lincoln Middle School, where it tells what are the expectations for being responsible when you get there and when you go home, the bathroom, the hallway, lunchroom, assemblies, bus, resource centers, and yes, classrooms. But my question is, are they actually implemented? Are your classroom rules clearly aligned to your school-wide expectations? Because again, guess what I look for when I walk in any classroom? I look for whether the school-wide expectations are articulated, taught, expected, rewarded in the classroom. So I want us to be thinking about what the world would look like if we had the capacity to design it, okay? Where are our gaps? Is our gaps at tier 2 or our gaps at tier 3? Are we making it up as we go along? I'm a big fan of proactively designed, and this takes leadership and typically a school and district level team to be able to put these components in place. An individual teacher, an individual principal, an individual team may not be able to put all the parts together unless they've got an opportunity to look at where their gaps are, to be able to figure out what goes in there, okay? And here's the things that I would put in to make sure it is part of tier 1. It should be pretty clear by now that I want to see really 2 or 3 things. An educative component, which is SEL, a validated SEL curriculum. Not enough. I need school-wide behavior support in some way, shape, or form that's really good, translated into the class. That's my tier 1. Okay? But guess what? I don't want to have tier 2 be empty, or tier 3. And yes, it's not the topic of my conversation today, but as we talk about a system, I want us to be able to fill in. What are we doing at tier 2? Because if we are working at the elementary level, and for me, I'll show you a little bit later, if I'm working at the elementary level, I'd sure like to see tier 2 be a component of first steps, one of the most validated, powerful early intervention programs for kids at risk for antisocial behavior. I'd like to be able to see something like connections or check in, check out. I'd like to see that institutionalized, ready to go, okay? And my check in, check out are aligned to my school-wide expectations with the idea that I'm providing feedback more frequently at the end of any set period of time or at the end of every period on my school-wide behavior objectives. I've got it all planned out. What is tier 2 check-in, check-out? It's more frequent feedback on my school-wide behavior expectations, or maybe just one or two of those expectations. But I got a plan, gang. And if I'm talking about tier 3, I'm looking at a more intensive version of Connections, a program by Randy Sprick, or check-in, check-out, high quality ABA, behavior intervention program. I need to have those skills in place, because if a kid has his behavior is so significantly discrepant that it's not responding to something like check in, check out, okay, implemented with fidelity, I need something more powerful. And this is where board certified behavior analysts come into play. And as kids get older, I need to have the capacity to deliver manualized cognitive behavior therapy programs. And this is delivered by my school psychologists, ideally getting more of them, less in the role of psychometrists, more in the role of social, emotional, behavioral interventionists, my school social workers and school counselors. Again, that's really what we talk about at tier 3, not the core. But I'm talking here that if we're going to have a solid core, we need to have a system, a plan. What's in place, what needs to be built, okay? That will always be my theme. What's in place, what needs to be built, if we're going to have a system. So again, core principles are trying to build that system, okay? All right. So where would I go? There are all of these PBIS implementations, okay? And I respect their work, okay? I've been, significantly influenced by, Rob Horner and George Sugai and folks that do that work, and it's outstanding. And I have a strong preference for how I translate those principles into schools by the gang around Safe and Civil Schools, and the work of Randy Sprick. Because what I like about Randy Sprick's work is that they actually have teacher-friendly, well-designed instructional materials to help translate those things into action. In my wife's district, they focus on implementing foundations as their tier 1 program, okay? Their tier 1 is based on implementation of foundations, including, managing, you talk about particular environments, how to respond at the very systems level, improving safety, conflict, reducing bullying, a lot of those things that would be the primary responsibility of tier 1. When I look at things, now I'm going to say like, okay, now how do we translate that into the classroom? My wife in charge of the district school improvement plan. They do foundations at the school-wide, and then they provide teachers, individual teachers, the strategies of champs to deliver what they do in the classroom. Is champs related to foundations? Absolutely. But instead of the focus being on the school, now we're talking about what a teacher does in their classroom. Related, systematic, all tied to creating nurturing environments by helping teachers translate those things into what they do when kids are taking those concepts of social emotional learning and applying them. Proactive, look at that. The language is proactive and positive. Again, going back to that notion of nurturing and kindness. Now, this is what we might do. Notice the title of the book is for grades K through 9. The principles apply at the high school level, but high school's different. And this is my go-to book at Tier 1 for a secondary teacher. I would like them to be able to take the principles of this book and apply it in the classroom. One of the important chapters is a chapter 2, I believe, and it's called Building a Better Grading System. A grading system is related to discipline? Absolutely. Let me give you an example. One of the principles of, excuse me if I look like I'm a vampire or something. It's dark and rainy here in Chicago. It's like we've had, I don't know how many inches of rain in the last 5 days. We're flooding. Grading. One of the principles of grading is a good grading system should instill hope. What? A good grading system should instill hope. What do I mean by that? If you've got a kid who has rarely passed a class, why would that kid behave very well in a class for a quarter, a semester, or a year? Now, if that kid has hope that if they do the work, they'll pass the class, that student may, I'm not saying will, may be more likely to be engaged, to learn, be successful, feel connected, stay in school. Grading system can help or hinder behavioral support. Let me give you another example that's related. My son Dominic, when he was in high school, I believe it was 10th grade, had an English teacher that if you did not pass his class the first quarter, there was no way you could pass the class for the year. Imagine that grading system. Now, you could say that he never failed anybody, but that was not true. Imagine a kid who has failed the first quarter, who has no hope of passing second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. What is that kid going to do? The odds of not behaving appropriately are significantly increased. So if we think about Tier 1, it's what we do at the level of the school. If we think about Tier 1, it's what we do at the level of the classroom. What is our professional learning that's targeting school teaching that is related to what we're doing at the level of the school? That's what I would call a system. A system that promotes nurturing, that promotes kindness, that promotes connection. I hope I'm beating this into the ground because it's really important, at least to me, that we identify what's out there that can help us really not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Investment in professional learning. We are now faced with one of the greatest opportunities for professional learning in my life. And it all comes from the funds allocated to schools to help reduce the potential deficits that were created by COVID. What are we going to do with that money? And I so hope we just don't go out and buy things, okay? But if we buy things, I want us to be buying professional learning. I want us to be able to say, what do we need to be able to build a system at the level of tier 1 in particular that will help keep kids in school and be more successful. Let's be wise in our choices. Now, when we talk about middle school and high school, okay, at tier 1, we cannot talk about middle school and high school unless we have a clearly articulated positive plan to work on growth and development that reduces tardies and issues around transitions. This is, to me, one of the most successful and validated interventions to promote kids being on time. Now, what's interesting, in refereed journals have been published results of using Start on Time and how it proactive design reduces tardies. Okay, and here's what else we know. Tardies are often starter fuel for kids with challenging behavior. What do I mean by starter fuel? Imagine a student who's now tardy for the 4th or 5th day in a row, and it's period 5 for a teacher. That teacher may be a little more tired, a little less tolerant, and now says something like, Mark, do you realize you've been on not on time for class? I'm wasting time waiting for you. This is like the 5th day in a row. And now Mark is also tired later on in the day, and he's not doing particularly well in the class. He just had a fight with his girlfriend or boyfriend, and now he flips the teacher off. Now the problem is not tardy, the problem is disobedience, not compliance, etc. And that has the potential to escalate. To me, if I'm building tier 1, prevention, promotion of positive development, I need to have a plan. Middle school and high schools, because of the more frequent transitions, because of all the other stuff that happens as part of social emotional development and peer relations, may have most commonly problems around tardies, and we need to prevent them. One of the ironies is that what we do to prevent tardies increases the connection between students and teachers. The things we do to help prepare our teams to address tardies help us in our interactions that are more positive and help with school connections. This is important. We don't have time for Randy. Now here's just one piece of data from one high school, okay? Average tardies. Now imagine a high school with 250 tardies a day. It's estimated that a tardy consumes about 15 minutes of adult time that is related to instruction, okay? Across the year, office referrals decreased by 2/3. Now to me, 1,000 office referrals is still pretty high, but a 2/3 reduction enables me to focus from kids that are 1 or 2 times to really what we call the high flyers. Here's the importance. When they tallied the amount of instructional time that was gained, 32,000 minutes of instructional time that was gained from reducing tardies through Start on Time. Positive promotion, okay, of development, important to the core. Now, I would be remiss if I also didn't mention how we need to build in as part of our core, things that everybody knows about and does, in terms of research-based alternatives to suspension. And I would argue the best work on this is being done by Jeff Sprague. How we address the alternatives. And it's not out of school suspension. Our program is now in school suspension, where now kids get to hang out with their best friends for, a period, 2 period, all day, 3 days in a row. Notice the title, Safety Without Suspensions, and notice the title on the second set of things that you can find for reading, building safe and healthy schools to promote school success. Okay, Jeff Sprague and Helen Walker. Things we put into place to promote positive development, okay, and help kids feel safe and connected. Okay, we now can talk about the real challenging part, which is core language arts curriculum aligned to two things: reading science and the needs of students. We have this, a culture that's been created in part by our colleges of education that are not teaching reading science. They're teaching things that are not true, that are comfortable, okay, appealing. We've been misled, if not duped, and I'm sorry for that language. We need a system that promotes positive development and successful early readers, okay? And look at the components. It needs to be research-based, and it needs to be of appropriate intensity. And if we don't know the differences among our curriculum choices, then we need to learn how to analyze the differences between curriculum or language arts program A and language arts program B. What are the strengths and weaknesses of A? What are the strengths and weaknesses of B? And then say, what do our students need? Okay? And that is something we typically don't do. We get lulled into the bright and shiny objects, the sales pitches, and not the science. Okay, so what are the results? This is from Kareem Weaver from the NAACP Oakland branch, who's been very vocal about reading instruction, especially in high needs communities. Here's what Kareem had to say. I'll read it because it's a lot of text. It turns out we know exactly why Johnny can't read. Instead of using brain science and overwhelming research consensus, we're still building strategies that reflect our own biases and theories. Johnny, a student, is left to fend for himself, and the only time he may receive the support he needs is when he reaches the point of crisis. I would argue that when the kid is identified for tier 2 or tier 3, now we start thinking about what Johnny needs. The result is, while educators debate the politics of reading, and it's about politics, gang, it's not about science, it's settled science. Johnny has literally become their political prisoners. Studies have shown nearly 80% of inmates are functionally illiterate and 47 to 50% have dyslexia. Now, I spent a couple years as the court-appointed staff development person for the California Youth Authority, kids ages 10 to 21 who committed felonies, serious crimes. And we looked at how poorly these kids read. I believe we had over 700 kids read to us individually. And how many of these kids said they wouldn't read? Not one. Every kid, when treated with respect and tested individually, read aloud to us, although not very well. They know it's important, but they become political prisoners. I don't like that program. I don't want to teach that. That's about the adults, not the kids. I did an audit on the state-controlled school district in another state, and the reading program was being developed by teachers with after-school hours using Pinterest. That, to me, puts unbelievable pressure on the teachers to do things, to discover what we have taken 2,000 years to learn, the science of reading. That to me is so unfair to teachers and so unfair to students. So let's take a look and let's do an analysis of what is your school. See if it fits how you would describe your students, your teachers, and your curriculum. Now, you know, I'm going to use words like well prepared, and I hate those words because they're filled with bias. But when you have kids that walk in the door with strong oral language backgrounds, print awareness, they're respectful and eager to learn, they're pretty easy to teach. But notice that word, though, that section on strong oral language background. Does your school have a curriculum that meets the needs of kids who do not enter with strong oral language backgrounds? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Are your teachers well prepared? And again, when I talk about well-prepared teachers, guess what I'm going to be talking about? Those that know how to create safe and nurturing classrooms, not letting everything go. That's not safe and nurturing. That permissive classroom. And by the way, when you see positive classrooms, that does not mean everybody's tense and everybody's nervous and the teachers, you know, looking for misbehavior and zapping them, I call it. That's not a positive classroom. But they use high leverage strategies too, like how to get kids engaged, keep them engaged, well, how to correct mistakes, what's appropriate homework, and what's the role of practice in school success, and strategies for differentiation. Those are teachers that I would say are well prepared. And is your curriculum strong? When I say strong, it's well designed, it's field tested, it has the right number of examples. Teachers know what to say when kids aren't successful, so they're not getting kids more confused, and they know what is really good practice and how to correct mistakes, okay? This is what I call Lake Wobegon for people who are as old as I am, or Nirvana, the perfect world. Now, some of you work in schools that are like this, okay? My wife's schools are pretty much now like this. Now let's take a different school. What if you've got kids that come to school that are less prepared? And let's talk about poor language background, academic English, okay? And they don't really have a lot of life experiences and learning opportunities. Did you know that, those teachers are going to be harder to teach unless you're ready for them? And when you've got kids like this, it puts even more pressure on teachers to be strong in those areas that I talked about in La La Land. Teachers got to be even stronger if that's possible. And guess what? It puts pressure on your curriculum to be strong. Because guess what? In this environment, you are tasked with reducing the achievement gap. If you teach the kids and they learn as much as kids in La La Land in the previous environment, the kids in this school are going to be behind at the end. They're going to be less successful early. They're going to be harder to teach. They're going to have more problems with discipline. Everything gets ramped up if indeed you're faced with the challenge of helping reduce the achievement gap. Now, some of you are in schools like this, and teachers are making up their own curriculum, or they're using research programs that are not research-based, okay? Teaching becomes extremely difficult. What if you're in a school like this? The students are less prepared. The teachers turn over a lot. They're less experienced, okay? And guess what? This puts huge pressure on your curriculum, because your curriculum might be the only thing that's there in 3 years. the teacher turnover or churn is high. Imagine being one of those teachers or a principal, and you're trying to do tiered services and reduce the achievement gap. You're not going to do it at tier 2 and tier 3. It puts pressure on your core to be great. Now, what happens if your students are less prepared and you don't have an appropriately intensive research-based curriculum? All the pressures on the teachers. All the pressures on the teachers. What are you going to do about it? Okay? Because now the teacher's going to have to do this, and the teacher's going to have to do that. Teacher's going to have to do this and that, especially if you expect core teachers to deliver tier 2 and tier 3. Oh my goodness, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that. If the expectation is that we reduce the achievement gap, meaning students have to learn more in the same period of time than kids in La La Land, imagine the pressure in this school on teachers, administrators, and I'm going to argue, how does that get translated for kids? So think about what your school is and what your school needs, because what we do in school A might look like what we, at part of the core, might be what we would do at school B at tier 2. Tier 1 is more intensive because we're using a supplemental program as well as the core. We need to be able to adjust, or what I say, increase the dosage, which we're not going to have enough time to talk about this morning. How do we increase the dosage or intensity of our core language arts program? So I'm a really big believer in what we can do to increase teacher knowledge of reading science. Okay, what can I do to get my staff to read chapters of this book? Okay, because here's what Seidenberg has to say, that as we think about pre-service teachers, they get an approach that they're taught that no single approach works for every child or every teacher. Okay, they get an eclectic array of different things that we might call balanced. Okay, and I use that term balanced because it is rarely research-based. So teachers are left to discover the stuff on their own. That's so unfair to teachers. If you look at the National Council on Teacher Quality, NCTQ, they've been able to trace the improvements that have been made in teacher education around reading science, but we still have a ways to go. Now, I'm going to show a video that has foul language in it, okay? So I will pre-correct. If you do not like this video, do not listen. It's an older video. It has a couple sort of like swear words in it. But it's the state where I think our country currently is in terms of researchers and those knowledge practitioners that are knowledgeable about reading science. And I would encourage you to evaluate, and didn't have time to see if there's a chapter, an Oklahoma chapter of the Reading League. That would be a really good sign that other people are upset.
Going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living room. Let me have my
ironic and cool,
my steel belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to ride. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crying in the streets. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
What we need is people getting mad as heck. And guess who's getting mad as heck? Parents. Dyslexia legislation for kids that are having reading difficulties is prevalent in pretty much every state. Legislators are listening and looking at the data. And what we are seeing is this. At least 20 states have passed or are considering measures saying that teachers need to be taught about the science of reading. North Carolina, teachers must use instruction grounded in the science of reading, and districts must use science of reading curricula. Other states are changing the requirements for teacher prep. Now, here's what we know from the National Council on Teacher Quality. Now, more than half, okay, we've gone up from a third to a half of programs teaching reading science, okay, in terms of outside evaluations. Okay, now that still means half of our teacher prep programs are not teaching the right stuff and making it more difficult for teachers to do their best work, making the job of teaching more difficult than it needs to be. Here's what we've known for decades, gang. This is a research published by Joel Torgerson in 2001. That if you got a young kid at risk for reading and a kid that's at low risk at the end of third grade, that gap is unbelievably large, okay? Almost 3 years gap between the kids that are easy to teach and the kids that are far more difficult to teach. And here's what we've known, that if you just add a research-based core program, we can reduce that gap. Now, that gap is still there, but it's reduced, and it gives us a foundation on which we can do even better. And even better is adding tiered interventions that can almost eliminate the gap. So what do we look for in a good program? We know that it includes stuff like this. It explicitly addresses oral language. It teaches academic English. It backfills for kids who just have not been around, not had the experiences and opportunities to learn as much as other kids just by living. And it explicitly teaches phonics. Now, as I said, what might be tier 2 in school A might be tier 1 in school B. Pretty much every district I know has schools that vary in terms of their percent of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And to me, that's a metric for helping me determine the intensity of my core program. I've got few kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch. My program needs to be research-based, but does not need to be as intensive as a school where I might have 35% or 60% or 80 or 90%, where I really need an appropriately intensive core program. And in fact, in that school that has 90% free and reduced lunch, my core might look like what is tier 3 someplace else. Okay, now I'm going to run through some things fairly quickly. I wanted, oh my goodness, got about 6 minutes. We know what it takes to get kids off to a healthy start. The national, the Institute for Education Sciences clearly articulates what's required. Look, we know that academic English, phonemic awareness, decoding, especially multisyllabic words, and then reading text every day to support reading accuracy, etc. We know this stuff. It's not something we need to work on or identify. We don't need the Nobel Prize for how to teach reading. What we need is leadership and people saying, I'm mad as heck and I'm not going to take it anymore. Being proactive rather than waiting for legislators to mandate, which I really, really, really hate. I'll take it as a last resort. I'd like us to manage our own business, because as educators, we're the professionals. We know what it takes at middle school, by the way, and high school. There's research that clearly articulates the components of what needs to go on in our English and language arts classes, supported in all of our work. So how we do this in science and social studies uses these same principles. It goes on and on and on and on about what to do. It's not a mystery. Academic literacy instruction for adolescents, a guidance document. Adolescent literacy, effective classroom and intervention practices, a classroom guide. We know what to do. We have rubrics that are developed for really young kids with respect to what goes into a core reading program, grades K through 5. Why in the world are we not using these rubrics to help us determine what programs we use for our students? And we know that the materials matter. This is research and reported in, from the Brookings Institute, called Choosing Blindly, okay? And strong evidence that the materials, the tools in the toolbox, rival the differences between having an okay teacher and a good teacher. It'll help us all get better, okay? And again, as we start thinking about the ability to use federal dollars that are entitling us to help reduce the achievement gap potentially caused by COVID, we have an opportunity to not only invest in professional learning, but an opportunity to invest in better curriculum that are research-based, and the changes we can get should be relatively easy. Note they say inexpensive. I disagree with that. And quick. All right. So here we are at 10:27. Kim, have you been? This is, by the way, the rest of the presentation is very briefly identified in the instructional strategies associated in content area classes, and these are all areas for professional learning. Kim, have you been monitoring any of the questions, and are there any comments from our group? And people can go live now if they want.
We have not gotten any questions yet, but everyone is free to enter them in now into the chat, and we can ask Dr. Shinn.
I'm sorry for not managing my time very well, but as I spend too much time prepping and have too much material. Any questions? Can they be asked orally?
I think their mics are disabled. We had one comment, this is great, in the chat.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. I'll take it. Again, my apologies for including a video that might potentially offend people, but it really, to me, captures sort of the state of where we are as a country. The professional community, the National Council on Teacher Quality, our legislators, and here's the deal: our parents. Again, I hope there's a Oklahoma chapter of the Reading League, which is organized by teachers and parents. And it's remarkable that, politicians are listening, but I don't want the work to be done by politicians. I want the work to be done by us as professional educators that say, look, I don't have the knowledge and tools to be able to do my best work. And I'd admire, I look at, any teacher, and I'm a teacher. I've taught, for 41 years now. My subjects have been ranging from college freshmen in courses they didn't want to take to doctoral students. And I can tell you, I have been thoroughly unprepared to do the work. And luckily, I've had good coaches to help me get better. I'm not any good still, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. I'm much more using much more research-based practices.
So Dr. Shinn, we do have an Oklahoma Reading League, and we've put many of our participants today, panelists today, our participants have put the link to the Reading League in the chat. So please go look at that if you're interested, guys. I think there's also a link to the National League in the chat as well.
Yeah.
I also put a link to my information if anybody wants to contact me and ask me about anything. There's also a link to the Oklahoma Edge platform for anybody who is interested in looking at our recorded sessions. And this session will be recorded and available on that platform as well if you want to recommend it to others. So
To that, Beth Ann, I'm going to say hallelujah.
yeah,
Okay?
it's very
I'm
exciting.
serious. That's wonderful news and not unexpected. I mean, the Reading League in the course of a few years has, I'm going to say, has had really serious impact. And it's not just exclusive, okay? It's being very inclusive. And materials, oh man, yep.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah, I'm a member, so it's really amazing.
Yeah, me too.
So I wanted to remind everyone that to come back here at 10:45, from 10:45 to 12:15, we'll have Dr. Duhan speaking about working from a firm foundation, and he's going to talk about evaluating your tier 1 a little bit more. And then later this afternoon, Dr. Shinn will be back right here at the same link from 1 to 2 to talk about supporting growth and development and powerful intervention through database decision making. So we'll talk a little bit about database decision making.
Dr. Shinn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have just a moment? There was one question in the chat.
Sure.
So they said that they know that you mentioned CASEL and that there is a way to access information on validated SEL programs through CASEL's website, but they wondered if you had another list of recommended SEL programs or any that maybe you highly regard.
That now goes outside of my expertise. Okay, so I wish that I knew more about validated SEL programs. I've known Roger Weisberg for a long period of time. I admired his work and the work of the CASEL Center. But as I drilled down, now I'd be talking, without a lot of confidence. Go to their site. And again, I've given you a link to Clay Cook's work. And if you've ever, that video is really good. And Clay is another person that I highly admire in terms of his effort to link. I still see schools that see SEL and behavior support as being antagonistic or competitive. And Clay's been able to say they go hand in glove. Okay, they do if implemented with integrity.